Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Yes. And
wonderful to be here. Episode 52, an entire year of episodes we've done for the Untold Radio Network. Isn't that astounding?
It's flown.
And you know what? More than ever, we need to say we are broadcasting on stolen land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we wish to acknowledge and give our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And our referendum failed on the weekend. It was a nightmare. And I think of all the pain and suffering in the world, you know, from Gaza to the Ukraine, all the conflict, all the people that are unloved out there. And I think how lucky we are. Every nanosecond, people like ourselves should just appreciate the fact that we have astounding lives.
Yes,
I mean,
we do.
To be able to cozy up in bed with you every night is an absolute joy.
Well, if only everybody could do that.
And I wish and I hope everyone can. And our hearts go out to
with their loved ones,
our First Nations people in this country and all countries around the world.
All First Nations people, and I think been hard done by.
We need to now try and drag the positive out of the negative, and that is we're having this conversation and push more towards unity and strength and acknowledgement that we possibly have all First Nations people are profound cultures, but we possibly have the oldest First Nation culture in the world that lived in complete harmony. Just a little over 200 years with such a young nation in terms of white settlement. We have destroyed this land, and we could have learned something from 80,000, possibly more years of living in harmony in the environment.
Anyway, eventually we might ascend.
So our hearts reach out. This is episode 52, Glial.
Yes.
The cells that can think. Now, life is a voyage. It's a journey of understanding every day. And I only skipped onto this literally a week ago, which is absolutely shameful in terms of myself.
Well, no, it's actually not, because the consensus in Western culture is that, you know, it was we only use 10% of our brains.
Well, that's complete mythology.
I know, but it's still out there. What they needed to say was that that science doesn't understand what our brain is and how it works.
I think, and we're going to talk
and what's in it.
A little about a bit about the great San Franciscan artist, author, lecturer, and remote viewer.
Well, yeah, I think he's
probably the prime remote viewer who's no longer in this mortal call with us. Ingo Swan.
Yeah.
And talk about the fact that he pointed these out. And I think it was only up until about 1996 that the first paper was published to say that we don't understand 50% of the brain. Now, we've brought back a repeating powerful force. Excuse me, I'm suffering a bit of hay fever. But we've brought back a repeating powerful force in Australia and the rest of the world, and that is Wojtek Bereza.
Yeah.
And Wojtek is an incredible pharmacist, and his mandate is to just get out there and assist people suffering depression, post-traumatic stress, and look for alternatives beyond that manufactured pharmaceutical world. And he's coming to us today from the Blue Mountains in his retreat there, which is, you know, a man after our own heart, Buckminster Fuller. It's a geodesic dome.
Wow.
And that's his getaway. And he's given up some valuable respite and study time to be with us on this podcast. So thank you so much, Wojtek, for returning to Down South Anomalies. We so appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jamie. Just you said we don't know 50% of the brain or what goes on. I think we don't know 99% of what's going on.
Okay, there you go.
No.
Can you explain to us the notion of maybe, you know, just skirting around your expertise, neuroscience and where consciousness sits. Is there a physiology to consciousness like the motor neuron system, or is consciousness now still totally oblique?
Yeah, great question. Where is your consciousness now? I think in ancient times, I used to think it was located around here, but we seem to think it's up at the top. Have there been any studies to kind of illustrate that? A lot of neuroscience and the structure of the brain and the different parts and their function actually came from a lot of studies in the early 1900s where parts of the human brain were removed. So there's a great study which you can see it on Sci-Hub, which is a man who is building a railroad track, and he's putting in the stakes for the railroad, and then they blow up. He puts in a stake near some dynamite which goes off, and the stake goes through his brain, and it cuts out a very specific part of the brain. And they realize that he exhibited a higher propensity to gamble afterwards.
Wow.
And
so he lobotomized himself, is that right?
Yeah. So it's like selective lobotomies. So and as more information became centrally held, there accumulated a database of how damages to the mind or the physiology of the brain exhibit in specific behavioral patterns. So they realize if you like remove the back of the brain, which is called the occipital lobe, you can't see. So there's different structure, functional relationships in the brain. And as of yet, they haven't found anything to do with consciousness. They haven't found a place where consciousness resides. You know, is there a place where you can remove and then that person becomes unconscious or conscious? No.
And here's an interesting thing about reductionistic science. It's quantitative. It needs a materialistic approach to evaluate these things. And consciousness just does not seem to be materialistic in terms of our own physiology.
Yeah.
I've
been talking
Can you
to a
wrap your mind around that?
Well, we've been talking to a lot of people about experiences with a medicine called ketamine, which is being used for depression in the US. And a lot of their experiences, they feel that they pop out of their body. So their sense of being becomes dissociated from the physicality. And that makes me think maybe there's a possible paranormal aspect to it.
We call it paranormal because we don't understand.
And here's an interesting point. When I was studying Ingo Swann, in the end, he was to assess that notion of the non-material universe. He started to speak about dark matter and dark energy. And you know, I was going through various scientific papers that all conflicted each other. And initially, I thought the percentage of dark matter, which is larger than anything else, yet it's not material, makes up about 60% of the known universe, the galaxy, the solar system, deep space. But at the end of the day, it looks like it makes up 90-something percent.
97%, wasn't it?
It is massive in terms, and in many ways, Ingo was saying that's where consciousness resides. And we are like receptors, and we pull from that consciousness and draw and get ideas and get notions. And this is maybe where this idea in the 90s, and I think to digress back, those papers on physiology in the brain, I think it was the mid-1800s that work was put in there, and it hasn't really been corrected since then. And it was put in by a group of students that were under 25 years of age. So we are all living on this extraordinary knowledge that we believe is the foundation of neuroscience.
Right.
And primarily, it's incredibly old in terms of that science. And maybe, you know, was in its infancy in trying to understand the physiology of the brain. Let's have a look at a little bit of science that can articulate better than I can about glial cells, and we'll see where they fit into the picture.
Glia actually refers to glue. The way they were originally defined is the glue of the nervous system. They're the little cells that are around the neurons that support the neurons and stick them all together. If any of these cells become dysfunctional, that will impact neurons as well, and neurons will also become dysfunctional. And that happens in a lot of diseases, like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease. So it's important to keep glia cells functioning well.
They're producing the myelin that is important for efficient electrical conduction, and also they are sources that either can contribute to injury in the brain under circumstances of trauma or neurodegeneration, or conversely produce molecules that can be protective. And that is why we want to understand the dynamic properties of these cells and to harness them for positive purposes and remove their potential harmful effects.
I think one of the things that we've been doing for a long time at the Neuro, which is probably the best in the world, is taking cells from brain surgery. Sometimes some brain material needs to be taken out that can't be put back in. So we take advantage of that, and we can culture these cells in a dish and make different glia cell types like oligodendrocytes or microglia, and then in a true human culture system, study the role and function of these cells in health and disease.
We have the experimental in vitro culture systems here at the Neuro. We have a technology so we can test how these cells can produce myelin in a tissue culture system and can test agents that can promote this.
One of the facilities at the Neuro is called EDDU, and this is a facility that helps to make inducible pluripotent stem cells, iPSCs. And these cells are interesting because you can derive them from human material. So you could take some skin or some blood from a patient, and then we can reprogram these cells to become stem cells. And from there, we can make different cell types. We can make neurons, we can make glia cells, and that's a really elegant model because then we can study the cell types that we wouldn't otherwise be able to study. iPSCs is really the next generation of understanding human disease. And we do that with single cells in a dish. We can make little mini brains, organoids, and we can look at how drugs interact with what these organoids or with these cells and see, hopefully discover drug targets and treatments for patients.
Well, there's a bit of officialdom there, but isn't it interesting how they're creating these drug targets and they can actually, replicate stem cells through glial cells?
Yeah.
And so it's quite fascinating. Evidently, glial cells, again, like dark matter and dark energy, are rampant. They are they make up an incredible amount of brain matter.
Yeah. And,
when did they discover? Do you know when they discovered them?
They discovered them a long time ago, I think in the 1800s. But
really?
They are now only beginning to realize their potential. They thought they were
like
a
junk DNA,
like a support structure
right,
for the neurons, and they were like scaffold. But they realize now they actually transmit tons of digital data.
right.
And also the other thing is that they have the ability to think between themselves.
Ooh.
And we'll have a look at that in a minute in a piece that comes from a TED Talk about the autopsy of Einstein's brain. Maybe let's go into that and then we can get into a bigger discussion.
To look for the clues to genius, all of the brain functions have to be a cellular-based function. So when Albert Einstein's brain was analyzed by Marion Diamond to find the cellular basis of genius, she analyzed a part of the brain involved in complex imagery and necessary for calculation, mathematical calculation, as well as a prefrontal region. When she looked at that, she found no difference in the number of neurons or the size of the neurons. What she found, however, was that Einstein's brain had more glia. And that was a moment that focused our attention on glia that had been ignored. Because all of our ideas about how the brain works goes back to this idea of analogy to electronic circuit. But the brain could work differently.
So what is the mechanism? Is there a mechanism that you can put your finger on that these glial cells will actually play a role that would make genius come to life?
So that was the breakthrough, is that neuroscientists were never going to understand what glia did while using electrodes to study the brain, because glia do not communicate by using electricity.
And that's part of why you missed them,
That's
right?
one of the reasons we missed them. So it took a new technique, and that technique was fluorescent calcium imaging. And if I can explain what that does, actually, you can have some of those slides of astrocytes. So we first show people what glia look like. So these are astrocytes. And you see they look nothing like neurons. So that's why they were dismissed. And why did Einstein's brain have more of them? Well, it turns out that glia communicate. And rather than electrodes, if I can have the house lights down just a little bit.
Yeah, you can bring the house lights down a bit.
Scientists developed a new method to study electrical activity, nervous activity. They took a dye.
Hang on, before you break it, can you bring the lights down? Yes, can bring the lights down. Yes.
All right.
All righty then.
Maybe not.
We can imagine that the lights now are down.
All right. Well, you've all seen this. I just want to explain to set up the next. This is a glow stick, right? And you know that when you break this stick, it makes light. And that works by mixing two chemicals together to generate light. Scientists realized that neurons communicate with ions, one of them being calcium. So they made a dye that would glow when calcium went into cells and put this in brain tissue to watch neurons. And in 1990, look what happened. In 1990, this is what they saw. The video, please, of astrocytes communicating. I put a dye into these astrocytes, and the brighter the fluorescence, the warmer the color. And these cells are communicating. This startled neuroscientists. They're not communicating using electricity. Can we roll it again? And not only are they communicating with each other, when I stimulate the neurons, it looks like lightning bolts. The glial cells respond. See that? The glial cells responded. All right, so just to bring this all together. Glial cells are communicating, unlike neurons that communicate like landline telephones serially. Glia broadcast signals. They work like cell phones, and they broadcast neurotransmitters. They also sense neural activity, and they respond to it. They release neurotransmitters at synapses and can strengthen synapses. They can remove the neurotransmitters that neurons use to communicate, weaken synapses. They can pick up electrical activity, communication between synapses, communicate it non-electrically through a glial network, and go control another synapse somewhere in the brain. And we've recently, just in a few years, discovered that astrocytes, a type of glial cell, tile the entire cortex in non-overlapping domains. So we now have a structure superimposed on the neuronal structure where glial cells can control individual domains up to 100,000 synapses per astrocytes. And this is a new dimension of brain function and regulation, and may explain how you can have regulation of moods. You talked about waking up with creative insights. That's well known, and I rely on it myself. Glia control moods, activities. They control neurotransmitter levels that maintain states of arousal. So there are many ways now that we see that glia could be involved.
So, excuse me, that was the World Science Festival.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a TED Talk. But as you can see there, that they are stating that these cells literally are able to think amongst themselves. And he goes on, took that one step further, that he said in conjunction with motor neuron behavior that we could actually train ourselves to have telepathy. Now, recently, we had a look at that episode of One Step Beyond with some students and colleagues of yours here in the archive, Wojtek, and it showed that our, through the use of psilocybin, that we were able to actually, increase our PSI power.
Yeah.
And I think, again, this has to do with stepping into the dark matter and into that aspect of the non-material universe.
Well, I think with the psilocybin in that report, when was that done? In 1959, I think it was, quite a long time ago. You've got to preface that with it's a very small study and it wasn't controlled.
No.
It definitely showed something that was very interesting and I think worthy of exploring further. I think in regards to kind of the glial cells, back to the origin of it, they knew that neurons were this kind of wire which connected, say an eye which is translating photons to electrical signals into the brain, and they knew that very well, that it was communicating a sequence which can be converted into information in the brain. And then the thing with glial cells back then is they knew that the glial cells were distinct from the cells around it. They knew that they had a specific property, but they just didn't know what. And a lot of the science that's been going on over the past 100 years is just kind of unraveling that. And it was found that glial cells very much so support this kind of support network. So they kind of maintain the neuron, the wire that's transmitting information. What you just showed there, that's completely new to me. I didn't know that it seems to have some sort of inherent, I'm not sure if you could call it an intelligence, but it's definitely doing something, some sort of like neurochemical system which is moving information outside of just that electrical conductivity of that neuron. It's fascinating.
And even though it's similar to quantum effect with particles, where you get particles having a very aligned presence over the course of what could be light years, which is absolutely astounding, the glial cells seem to be acting in the same way. Although people like Ingo Swann, who certainly had done the research behind the scenes with intelligence agencies, I mean, he was approached in the early 70s because of his PSI power. People even believe now that the promotion of Uri Geller to the public stage was a way to actually take the heat off the incredible potential that Ingo Swann had, that we're also showing something that may be outside of that quantum effect. As they were stating there, it doesn't seem to be similar to the firing of the neurons in terms of electrical charge. It seems to be some sort of sympathetic osmosis, between the cells. But it shows you just the profound power of the human mind. And now, if you'd excuse me, and we'll really get into a dialogue after this, I'm going to go back to a lecture about 6 years before Ingo Swann passed on. This is in his later life, in his 70s, where he speaks directly about this. And this is about 10 minutes, and then we'll get into a robust conversation.
Answer me, audience. Answer his question. Nobody can answer that?
No, we agree with it.
Pardon?
We agree with it. Or at least I think the silence means that we're in agreement with what you're saying.
With what I'm saying?
And what,
Yes. But there's something really odd about it. And you'll never know what it is until I point it out. There's one thing in this definition that's so taken for granted that it doesn't even appear as a question. Right? I'll read it again. I'd like to know if you can spot it. Parapsychology is a modern, more restricted form of psychical research. The field which uses a scientific method to investigate phenomena for which there appears to be no normal sensory explanations. What is the scientific method? Repeatable what? You're not quite following me. We are questioning which scientific method. Gotcha. Nobody ever thinks to say, what is this scientific method they're using? Right? Damn right. What is this current wonderful scientific method based in?
Hypothesis, test, analysis, conclusion.
It's based in materialism, which is defined the theory that physical matter is the only reality, and that all being and processes and phenomena can be explained as the manifestations or results of matter. When did that come into being? I know, but I want to know if anybody else knows. 1845. The four guys who got it together and pushed it into chemistry and then into physics were under 24 years old. And they have ruled the materialistic age. Now, the reason I'm focusing on these things here is I'm going to tell you what's happened to the only reality. See, if it was just a theory that physical matter exists and that processes and so forth and everything can blah, 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 and everything, but it's the only reality. This definition is taken from my trustworthy Webster's Intercollegiate Dictionary of 1974. This was still the official definition of materialism. Only reality, I'm arguing, you see. So when people say the scientific method, they're referring, by implication, to the matter is the only reality. So if there's something around that is not made by matter, is not matter or something like that, they cannot test it with the scientific method because it's not made of matter. Got it? I very seldom prepare notes, but the things I'm going to say are so earth-shaking that I thought I should. And I'm going to point out one thing that the material sciences cannot explain, account for, or even find the mental processes that go on in it is consciousness. If you can't explain consciousness, you can't explain anything we're interested in. You can explain mercantilism. You can explain atomic bombs. You can explain everything else. But there is no currently existing science of consciousness. Here's a book by this guy named Roger Penrose, who's a very famous physicist in England. It is entitled Shadows of the Mind. It is subtitled The Search for the Missing Science of Consciousness. Parapsychology should, from the get-go, have been interested in the phenomena of consciousness and not in the scientific method. I'm old enough, I'm over the hill now, I don't have to be careful anymore about what I say amongst my peers, so I'm saying it. There's no science of consciousness. How can remote viewing, telepathy, blah, 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 all these things be explained if they're functions of consciousness, and the consciousness of science is still missing in the year 2006? You see why my colleagues found me a little difficult to deal with at times? It has turned out, according to this book, you see, if I say it on my own, nobody believes me, but if somebody of this standing says it, then they have to chew on it at least a little bit. It's turned out that consciousness or science is not explainable as processes or result of matter. This book moans and groans about that for at least 100 pages. It cannot be captured by the quantifiable method. It is not quantifiable as all other aspects of matter. It does ask, I must say, what new physics we need
to understand consciousness and the mind as well. Now, what has happened to the only reality? I tried to bring along a few things. First of all, this is Scientific American. I don't know what the date is, but here's the cover. Has science missed half the brain? The brain is a matter thing, you know. And scientists have now begun to realize that they've missed half of it. Well, there it is, Dr. Tiller.
I read it too.
You wrote it too?
I read it.
Oh, you've read it. Good. Isn't that funny? I think it's hilarious. They've been researching the brain for all this time and they missed half of it. These are the glial cells that were thought for a long time to merely bring nutrition to the synapses in the neurons, and the vitamins that they needed to work on and things like that. But now it's been discovered that the glial cells carry at least 100,000 times worth of what we might think of as digitalized information as well as nutrition to the neurons. Did I get it right? Yes. Specialty of Dr. Persinger in Canada, who's been locked out of his laboratory because he's gone so far advanced in the materialistic sciences that something had to be done about him. Did you know that? A mini inquisition up there. Laurentian University, right. Are you going to give part of this lecture? Can you read this? Parallel universes. Now, quantum physics says the entire universe might be a hologram. Are you a hologram? Do you know what a hologram is? Tell me. Somebody who shook their head tell what a hologram is. No, it's not. It's interstices of crossing light beams. So, you know, the ancients said we're made of light, everything's made of light anyway. That's what they meant. It's probably a hologram. Since we can pinch our holograms, it might not be too real. New dimensions, multiple dimensions have been theoretically discovered and proposed. See, you can meet yourself in another dimension.
All right, let's just do a tiny bit. Excuse us again there, Wojciech. Let's just do a tiny bit on Ingo Swann. Now, Ingo Swann was probably the primary remote viewer and used by U.S. intelligence services and the military, and definitely kicked off Project Starlight there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Isn't it Stargate?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
There's a little sort of about the glial cells and motor neuron response. And here's an interesting book on that material. But there is a plethora of work by Ingo Swann, and probably the most important to us in terms of down south anomalies is to look at penetration, the question of extraterrestrial and human telepathy. An astounding book. He was also one of the most profound artists you could ever come across. Yeah. His artwork is amazing. This is a piece that he says is his vision of what occurred to him one night when he was taken to Alaska by intelligence agents to observe this object draining water out of a lake. And this book, you don't have to go and purchase it expensively. There is a special updated edition of Penetration that I think sells for about $30 US on Amazon. So is that enough insight? You were a bit worried we didn't give enough insight.
I just think Ingo. When we first heard about him and looked into him and read all about him, he's a really fascinating and amazing character. And absolutely, the intelligence agencies in America have used him extensively, and he was their go-to man, and then ended up dying in poverty.
Well, I mean,
know.
a bit like you're coming to us from a structure that is, for all intensive purposes, a geodesic dome by the extraordinary
Buckminster
futurist
Fuller.
thinker Buckminster Fuller, who literally died in poverty as well.
Again, yeah.
And these people, these great forward thinkers that sit outside of orthodoxy, really
and
pushes forward.
pushes orthodoxy forward.
But end up, I mean, the interviews that
actually drags them kicking and
that
screaming.
Buckminster Fuller did in the end were basically on public cable TV in the US. Can you give us a little look around that structure you've got there, just quickly?
I'll show you the top of it. It's up there. So that's the connecting part of the hexagon. So they meet together.
Geodesic dome is the strongest structure.
Yes.
In known.
It is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and he was able to come up with that.
That is remarkable, and thank you for taking the time to do that for our watchers and listeners who can't see it. Anyway, look, sorry about all that food for thought we've thrown.
That was a bit of a information dump then, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, it's like you kind of, unless you've read all about him and know all that stuff beforehand, it's
But it does remind me of, like, you're about to start workshops in Sydney on the medicalized use of marijuana, THC. And, we've all got receptors in our brain that are there to be heightened by that psychoactive drug. If humanity did not have those receptors, then our approach to the use of that drug in many ways would be so different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe tell us about the human neurological system, or anything you want to discuss about what you've just seen. But in terms of, like, these receptors are there. The human body is bred to ingest that ubiquitous weed.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting in neurochemistry and drugs is, why these systems that are the receptors inside of the body, why are they there? It's not like it just miraculously there's opioid receptors which are innovated by things like fentanyl or morphine, which cause pain reduction. Those opioid receptors inside of people's bodies, they're there for the feeling of love, or with oxytocin for the feeling of compassion, or for the sympathetic nervous system and adrenaline to heighten aggression, testosterone, things like that. So yeah, there's inherent systems which I think medicines can take advantage of. But in regards to the video we just saw, it's interesting. And it's an interesting point because he's reverting all the way back to baseline consciousness. So I think it was just Descartes, and he says, the fundamental aspect of being is I think, therefore I am, right? It's like, that's the first point. But I think what he's referring to is what's behind that. Where does that initiation come from? And I think it's very interesting when you start thinking and going into materialism, the world around us, it's really all that we see, all that we know, because, all of our receptors and our sensory perception is based around that. But what I find interesting with that video is, what is behind there? What is, is it the soul? Is it something that's logical? Is it emotional? But I think where his argument kind of gets a bit strange for me is that what is consciousness? And getting a true grip on that and definition, I think it's kind of difficult. For me, it's really awareness. It's, this brain is lots of electrical activity, lots of neurochemistry going on, almost like a symphony is going on. And as I'm getting older, I'm realizing that, there is a sense of logic inside of my brain, but there's lots of different imperfect thought mechanisms, lots of primordial neurochemistry like aggression and greed and all these other things. And what I find really interesting is trying to deduct all of those different aspects from my being to try and get to what is that consciousness, what is that kind of pure, or if there is anything pure, right in the center of all of that.
But you know what there are those base emotions, but your driver to me appears to be compassion and empathy. How did those emotions, which you can state in a orthodox medical sense, which are basically chemical reactions, how did they become predominant in you? Was that something that you actually, through your thought processes, pushed to the forefront of your being? Maybe because you had a far more loving upbringing than most, and you can see that, you know, there's a greater harmony through that compassion and empathy. Why has that become predominant in your ideology?
I've worked in community pharmacy all my life, so I've seen people come in, and the amount of difficulty people experience through, you know, disease, psychosocial, or like somatic, like physical disease. We don't see it in our day to day. We see things on TV, things in Hollywood where people have like perfect health, great teeth, and it's all kind of pushed towards us. But I was very privileged growing up seeing normal people, everyday life, and there's a lot more of it than we see. And it kind of goes back to your initial quote of, we're so lucky, you know, we're so lucky to have our health, be able to breathe, and all these other things. And that's where I think my empathies come from.
But that's not necessarily true. That might be where yours came from, but there's a lot of people that I know that have worked in those fields, and they've been the biggest, the worst negative people,
predators
exploitive, that have worked. And that doesn't necessarily, just because you're around it doesn't mean that you
are going to take it in.
Empathetic, right? Because there's other people that are there and then see it and actually take advantage and hurt these already downtrodden and outcast and so underprivileged people, and make their lives even more of a living hell. So that can't be it.
Well,
that can't be it.
I've met a lot of doctors in my life, and I've met a lot of like different healthcare professionals, and I think what's interesting in them is there's this kind of overlap of, if you look at the hierarchy of how much people are paid in the world, you kind of doctors get paid quite a lot, right?
Sure.
And there's certain people who start out in life and they're not necessarily have the right skill set, what I believe, you know, the empathy and
but we know that.
They're going for the money, right? And I think what happens is that type of person goes in and they work really hard, you know, being a doctor, farmer, all these things, they take a long time to become. And then they get to the top of it, and then they realize, oh, now I'm in this profession and I'm making loads of money. Oh, I have to deal with these bloody idiots every day, like people coughing on me, and that the reality comes in. I think that's a very common thing in human psychology.
But if you're around people like that and you saw the you know the suffering that they're going through and everything else, why would you not have empathy for them? Do you know what I mean?
Seems
or
like
even sympathy.
Sense,
do you know what I mean? Because we would, but there's other people that would just don't give a shit. They just don't care.
And at the
you know
moment,
what I mean?
You're up there in the
so
blue
I'm
mountains.
saying that it's this consciousness thing is, I think, is you know, it's really hard because you can see I see people from from a family, like siblings, and one is the most generous, giving, loving, and the other one is just a total sociopath. I mean, how does that work? Is it something that you know the brain is because I truly believe that the brain is like a receiver. It's a receiver. And we are tapping into something outside of ourselves, because then that would explain things like, you know, somebody has an accident and they wake up and they're speaking this foreign language that they've never spoken, they've never been around, and all of a sudden they're fluent in a totally, a language that just, it's like, how does that happen? How?
I've got a bit
So
of an
obviously,
answer. I've got a bit of an answer for you.
you
right?
have? Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay.
I'll let you
and
know if
sorry,
you're
sorry
wrong
to keep
or
bringing it back to drugs all the time, but it's
Yeah,
my
yeah.
speciality. If I got just a random male and female, say you and Jay, and I gave you each a dose of MDMA, so ecstasy. So, and it's fine to talk about this nowadays because it's
You'd
approaching.
be lucky to get it into me, but anyway.
It's phase 3 clinical trial in the US, and it's going to be a licensed medicine out there. And we're in Australia at the moment, where it's completely legal as well, and it's being going to be used in psychiatry. So if I gave a male and a female MDMA, causes the release of specific neurotransmitters in the brain.
Serotonin.
One of them's oxytocin, different ones. And they can give both people in that experiment, you and Jamie, a psychometric test. And before you kind of write down this thing and you answer questions, and it figures out how empathetic you are at that point. And then once you're on the drug, they then do the test again, and then they figure out the differences, right? And it's very well known, MDMA, those types of medicines make people more empathetic. But what's very interesting is there's a difference between the sexes.
Right.
There's a difference between how much empathy a woman feels opposed to a man.
Right.
And the reason for that is there's
We're wired differently. Yeah.
They're wired differently. And
absolutely,
that, in a sense, might explain what you were kind of talking about. And maybe with me, that I may have extra receptors in my brain. I may have more release of oxytocin naturally within my mind, which causes me to behave like that. So, yeah, it's very difficult because it's a mix of my environment plus my genetic.
But how do you know? How do you know that by giving us that drug, right, it didn't open up something in our brain that we could tap into something higher or more? Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? How do you know that didn't happen? You can't. Again, because there you go. Thank you. I told you I was wrong. No, I'm kidding. But that's,
no, we don't know. But it's the materialistic aspect, right? It's
but
we
see,
don't know
there
that
you
full
go.
Picture, but
no, we
from
can't.
What we do know, and it's not hugely well founded, but it gives us a little bit of an inkling in this material world. That's the case. There may be
because
something that we don't know.
You're measuring something in a material aspect that could possibly be something non-material. Do you know what I mean? And you're just getting this reaction or this result from doing that because it's opened up something.
But I also think too, we've got the motor neuron system here, right? And that motor neuron system you can train to do certain things with yourself physiologically. You can ride a bike, you can ride a car. And after a while, those abilities, those skills become sort of second nature.
Yeah.
You go into automatic. In a sense, an individual like yourself may have, over the course of your lifespan, trained those cells to actually create more of a chemical conditions for your empathy to be more pronounced.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, throughout my life, I found the people that I respect most are the people who have the most compassion for others. And I think in the world that we're in now, where people are very much kind of individualized, compartmentalized, atomized, I think it's becoming more important. So,
I mean, we're a usury society. The basis that it's this capitalist system and, the supposed democracy means that a lot of people have to lose for quite a few to win.
Yeah.
And so there will always be this incredible loss and hierarchy, and that's hence creating this myth of the individual, the power of that single artist, that person that can become a star, that can become something else.
We tell our children all the time now. It's like, you are so special, and it's like, you're actually not. You're one of 8 billion people on this planet.
And we tell them they're special to us, but to no one else.
Yeah, I say to my grandchildren, you're special to us, but the rest of the world couldn't give a shit about you. You're just another person on this planet that's, a blight on it.
Well, it gives a realistic sense, right? Because if you grow up and you think you're going to be a superstar,
we're not that special. We're not, but we in the Western world, we are told that, by advertising day and night, that we are special, and we need to buy this, to show people who we are. We need to drive this car so we can tell them, how great we are. And if we don't drive that, or if we don't have this, then, we're not as successful as we should be. And so we start to get an inflated, sense of ourselves, which is, it does nothing for anybody else. It doesn't push humanity forward. It actually drags us back, to a horrible, selfish, narcissistic society, that nobody's as special as you are. And it's like, you go out and live on your own for a while in isolation and see how special you are.
Because
you'll be nothing.
And
absolutely.
As sort of
what?
Tragic entertainers here, I know that we are nothing without an audience. What we do and what we've chosen to do,
we actually feed off the audience
in our life. It is absolutely nothing unless there is a receptive group of people there. And when you uplift those people,
they uplift
you.
You
show compassion, it's extraordinary, the change in them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if we stuck them on an ECG, we did a brainwave analysis, we would see a heightened sense of their alpha waves and their contentment, just like the light that is used to replicate what happens when psychoactives
have you
brain
heard
chemistry.
There's something called collective neuroscience. Have you heard of this term?
No.
What is
Very
that?
Cool. It's the idea of, what an MRI machine is?
Yes, magnetic resonance.
Yeah, you're putting someone's brain in a machine, and the machine's pretty much telling you what the activity is going on. And I got really interested in that a number of years ago because they started doing something called functional MRI, which is they put you in the machine, but then they get you to do something. And it was interesting to watch people looking at a TV screen with Hitler on it, or watching porn, or just what happens in their brain. And what they've been doing recently is putting 2 people in MRI machines at the same time, but they communicate within the MRI machine. Wow. And they're looking at their brain. And what's fascinating is this kind of synchronicity, they call it synchrony, occurs. And I was just thinking, when you go to a dinner party or you meet someone new, there's that beginning 5-10 minutes, which is a little bit awkward, and you're kind of readjusting.
Sizing each other up.
Yeah, but they found that what happens after that kind of initial period is the brain waves. And as I said, it's almost like a symphony in the brain of chemicals and electrical signals. You can see on an MRI machine that now our brains are synchronized at that same level.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's just one brain doing that.
But how does that work?
And is that the glial cells, and is that your love for Laura?
And my doggy.
And your dog.
It could be the glial cells because that's part of the whole thing. I think a lot of the glial cells, it was partly electrical, partly chemical as well. And MRI
mostly chemical.
Yeah, MRI might not show that so well, but I thought it was interesting in a sense of that kind of telepathy as well, in having that synchronization of the mind, but then you're fully apart and you're not, massively communicating.
Obviously, the semantics is
Yeah.
wrong here.
Yeah.
The word telepathy
Yeah.
needs to go
Mm-hmm.
because it has these
Well, it's just got such a
paranormal,
negative,
flaky
yeah,
connotations.
yeah. People are like, I know there's nobody.
Now, before we end our podcast, there's two things I wish to discuss with you. You've got an incredible project up there, which is full of empathy, which is about creating, you know, we've been decimated, and so many people have been in culture after what we've lived through in the last 3 years. And, you know, Sydney has got a rental crisis. People are finding it difficult to find work. And you've created your own sort of healthy eating food drive up there. Can you explain that to us, Wojtek?
Well, look, I'm part of the collective. It's the people around me, which is we're all pushing it together. But it's really recognizing, you know, I think in times of crisis, going back to what you know, and I think one of the key aspects of being human is we're a social being. We how things have been going recently, I think, you know, since the pandemic and stuff, I think we've been pushed apart. So bringing people back together is really important. And I think one thing we all love is eating, right? You know, and I think with the Uber Eats, and I kind of fell into that. It just makes it very easy to kind of access really tasty food, but you know, it puts it on the waistline. It puts it.
Have you ever thought of cooking? Maybe.
Yeah, that's what I.
And also the amount of fatal casualties that are turning out there with drivers of that stuff is
anyway. What can you do?
Yeah, you see them on the pavement, and it's pretty crazy.
No, it's bad. Not good.
But
well, you
anyway,
know, we have,
we've
never had an Uber Eats. We've never
really.
Well, we don't have a mobile phone, so we can't access Uber Eats,
and nor do we
or
want
Ubers,
That's why you're so
or
skinny.
anything.
You too.
No, I'm not. No, we cook at home. That's why we're so well. I'm so.
Anyway, just keep
go on,
going
sorry.
with that.
Like when you cook at home, it's got a bit of love in it, you know. Like you put a bit of heart in it.
And you know what? If I will make a dish, and sometimes Jamie says to me, wow, this tastes really good. And it's a dish that I've made, quite a few times, a lot of times. And I'll say to him, I put extra love in that one. Do you know what I mean? Because I was seriously, and I said it once, and I thought, actually, that is true, because when I was making it, I was really thinking strongly about making it really tasty for him, because I love him. You know what I mean? So I was like in that moment thinking about him when I was cooking it.
Yeah.
And he just happened to say, this tastes really, really, you know, even better than it normally does. So,
and how about recently when we finished Bondi Wood with the Maverick outsider director, Hayden Keenan, and his beautiful wife?
Yeah.
What they did to return the hard work we put in.
Well,
was to cook us dinner.
Yeah, they cooked us this beautiful meal, and it was really, and you know, it was, I don't know, it's really hard to explain, but you kind of really appreciate it, and you know that they really tried very hard and put lots of love into that meal. It was really quite amazing. So
I don't know. So tell us about what's happening up there in that regard. So is it like?
Look, I don't want to get too kind of hippy dippy, but we're kind of like looking at trying to become more sustainable, and just looking at. So I'm building a small plot of land, kind of an allotment here where I'm growing vegetables. In the village itself, we're trying to get other people to grow vegetables as well. Mm-hmm. And then what we've got is a centralized house, which someone's lets us use their kitchen, and we've got a license in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing is we're pulling in all of the produce from the surrounding grow it your own, and then making a dinner. And what we're doing the dinner in are these Indian tiffins, and then we're just serving to the community, like whoever wants it. And the response has just been fantastic. You know, people are just quite lonely at home, you know, elderly people, and then coming out, and then we're just having this great meal, and it happens once a week, and it's just like.
Well, it's you know, you're using food as a hook to actually bring people together
Bring
and to
community
socialise.
together and
You know
to
what I
actually
mean?
find out who is alone and what support they
Well,
need. And
that's always the thing, isn't it? Because I know, like, once churches disappeared and people stopped going to church. Not that I was a big whatsy of churches because of stuff, but they were a great conduit
Community.
for the community.
Yeah.
And
100%.
so if somebody didn't turn up at church on a Sunday because there was nowhere else to go,
the
right?
community would
The community would say, well, I haven't seen, old Mrs. Johnson for actually a few days. She hasn't been in to pick up her meat or pick up her bread or whatever. And so they would send somebody around to the house to check on her. And so you didn't get people being dead in their house for like 2 years before somebody realized that person had died, because nobody cared about that person, because that person wasn't part of a greater community that actually looked out for each other, And it's sad that, but I always thought that, every sort of suburb or area has like a town hall. They should have like a potluck dinner once a month and invite everybody. It's like, bring a dish, everybody come down, and you can meet your community. You can meet your neighbors. You can get to talk to them. And it should be a mandatory thing. But unfortunately, the cities, everybody's busy doing I don't know what, you know what I mean? But we need to get back to like a village mentality where everyone, not busybodies, but everybody's looking out and making sure that everybody's okay and everybody's got what they need to survive,
And that's exactly what we're after. And I think one thing I'd really like to do as well is get an oven. I was reading, like, in Roman times, there used to be like a communal central oven in a lot of the villages. And people would just go down and they use like kind of amphora, which like the kind of cups that are enclosed, and they'd fill it up with food, put the amphora in the fire, and then they'd come back later in the day, pick it up, and they just have like this kind of pot noodle kind of thing. So I just something that brings people together. Food is ubiquitous.
Absolutely.
It's an easy thing to do. It'd be great if the council could get involved, but if there's like some money,
but you've got to do it whether they do or not, and you are doing that.
Yeah, because sometimes unfortunately, the councils, it's all about, you
bureaucracy
can't
and working through this occupational health and safety. They put out too many blockades.
Exactly. Is this going to be safe? What if somebody gets food poisoning? They're going to, they're going to sue us, and I can't be calm.
And then nothing happens, right? So I just think
nothing happens. Yeah,
I think we got to work parallel. I think we've got to be like, right, well, there's a government. It's a bit shit because the size of it, and also they get lost in that governance, right? Like no one in that job wants to get fired. So what they do is they write all these standard operating procedures.
Well, they do what they have to stay there.
Everyone has to follow absolutely everything. And then you have to hire outside consultants so the liability is kind of distributed and it gets hidden.
Minimized.
But then just to do anything, like to have a dinner or to have an oven, you're going to have to spend $500,000, right? Like,
who's going to do that? Yeah.
It's not a working thing. And in my mind, we kind of got to like push past that, and we've just got to do our own thing,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't want to break laws, but we will bend them till they're just about to break. Because, I worked in street welfare. I drove a mission beat van. That was out of the Bowery. Those ideas came about for people who are intoxicated or homeless or running from abuse.
Couldn't even get a soup kitchen opening.
It's all charity based. So you had Matthew Talbot, you had the Salvation Army, you had St. Vincent de Paul. They all fought amongst each other as to how this should be run, and in the end, nothing occurred.
No one ran anything.
I mean, it's just a freaking nightmare. Now, the other thing quickly to get to is, I think it may be next week in Sydney. You've managed to wrangle the Hub, one of the oldest cinemas, and you're doing a whole thing on medicalized marijuana, a discussion about that. Tell us about that.
As you guys know, I'm really interested in, psychedelics, but also this thing called pivotal mental states. And it's the idea that certain, it could be a drug, or it could be jumping out of an airplane, like parachuting, or it could be like Wim Hof, like jumping into cold water. They cause these things called pivotal mental states, which have been shown can actually change people's minds. They can pull people out of depression, or they can get them out of hyper-consumerism, or they can get them out of different things. And when we talked before, I do stuff on psychedelics where I go out and lecture and talk to people about it. But what we recently realized is medicinal cannabis has been used to achieve these pivotal mental states. And it seems that there's a need for people to have talk therapy, because people, as I said, are becoming atomized, and they're doing these medicines by themselves. And the idea, to get better is to have talk therapy, maybe go to a psychiatrist and all these other things, but it costs a huge amount of money. And the idea with these meetups, this new medicinal cannabis thing, is why can't we get together and almost have counseling to one another? Why can't we kind of like pair up? If we can't afford $500 an hour for a psychiatrist, or $200,
cut out the psychiatrist.
Can't we kind of like come together? And I'm going to try and mediate some of the beginning of it. But it should be great to have a place where people can go and they share commonality, whether that's cannabis or whatever, and we can kind of match people together and we can talk. I just thought, why not? I can do that.
Of course you can.
A couple of hours. We're doing it on the 7th in Newtown. And Chris at the hub said, go and do it. And we're going to do it. And
that's free for people. And what time does that kick off?
It kicks off at 7 p.m.
Okay. Well, for our international audience, I'm not sure anyone's going to fly in for it, but they should.
Jamie, we did at the last one. So it didn't fly from abroad, but someone flew down from Brisbane.
Right. There you go.
Wow.
And because he didn't have anywhere else to go, he didn't have a psychiatrist.
Wow.
He could fly down for $200 to
cheaper to go. Wow, isn't that bizarre?
I was like, you're crazy. You're like,
no, that shows you how effective is what you're doing. What a gap in that system there is. And the more that people communicate, then takes it away from the danger of the illegal market. People are going to self-medicate. I was a drug and alcohol counselor for years, and people are going to self-medicate no matter what. And when you look at their historical background, I can certainly empathize and understand why they do.
Absolutely.
And that should not be seen as anything that actually dips them into the world of what we, assume to be criminality. What they need to do is have great communication and understanding so they can do this stuff the safest way and the best way for them. I've seen THC resolve major problems with arthritis and people's anxiety literally overnight.
Pain.
It's not there for everyone.
No, I can't do it.
And that's why there might be something else that's suitable for them.
For sure.
Or even just the catharsis of being able to speak to someone about these problems and seek natural alternatives. How do people get in touch with you yet again, Wojtek?
The Transparent Company. So everything I'm doing is going through the Transparent Company. And it's because healthcare, it doesn't disclose a lot of the forces behind it. So, and I'm trying to get out from that. I'm not influenced by a pharmaceutical industry. I'm not influenced by someone paying me behind the scenes. And you don't have to trust me because the Transparent Company discloses all information that we deal with financially. So
is that by simply punching that into Google?
Yep. It's the first. I checked the other day. It comes up first. So with it.
Okay, the Transparent Company.
Okay, well, that's easy enough.
That is astounding. Look, I can't thank you enough for your time. But
you're doing good work out there.
You are doing profound work. We absolutely adore you. We're going to bring a 16mm xenon arc projector up to that retreat one night. Just after supper, we'll have a look at some interesting...
What are we going to show?
I've got no idea at this stage. Yeah. We will discuss that with Wojtek. Yeah. But we're going to... today we've been actually playing stuff to you. So I'm going to end with a doctor out of New York City just after Ingo Swann had passed away. And this is about 6 minutes of what he was able to get out of Ingo.
Okay.
Well, hey everyone, how you doing today? Well, we're coming with a special video for you today. We're in the neighborhood where Ingo Swan used to live until a short time ago when he passed over in January of this year, 2013. And I wanted to make this little video for you because I was fortunate enough to be able to have a conversation with him in January, just a few days before that happened. And I was able to ask him about why he thought remote viewing worked, what some of the mechanisms were, and he brought up some very interesting information that was new to me, and I just felt I should really share it with you. I talked to him on the phone a few times, and when I finally went over there, we talked about all sorts of RV history and things that were going on with it and science topics, and you know, he was just a great guy, and you could talk to him about anything because he was so well versed in so many subjects. So one of the subjects that I wanted to bring up with Ingo when I met with him was, sorry for the noise here, it's a little noisy, this neighborhood. One of the things I wanted to bring up with him was the statement that Russell Targ had made at one of the previous International Remote Viewing Association meetings in Henderson, Nevada, last year in 2012. You know, Russell Targ is one of the founders of the program that created remote viewing as we know it in the 1970s at Stanford Research International together with Hal Puthoff. And Ingo was one of their first subjects they were able to, you know, work with and experiment with to see if this was for real. Well, what Russell told us was, in the middle of his talk, and I don't think he'll mind me telling you this, in the middle of his talk he stopped and said, okay everybody, I want everyone to listen up. Remote viewing has nothing to do with quantum mechanics. The reason it works is because you're a large being, I'm paraphrasing here, you're a large being who transcends space and time, and that's why all of reality is perceptible by you. Just paraphrasing what he said. And so some of the previous speakers at the conference had suggested to us that the reason things like remote viewing work, I like to think of it as a type of resonance rather than remoteness. The reason it worked was because it had to do with quantum entanglement, you know, what Einstein called spooky action at a distance, you know, some sort of non-local interaction between quantum entangled particles. You know, it's a very hot subject in science these days because of the possible applications. Well, here's what Ingo had to say about that. And this is as far as I can remember exactly what he said. Russell's right. And he turned away and said, but not entirely. And so I was wondering what he meant by that. Not entirely in what way? Well, he went on to tell me his ideas about what he thought was going on here. And what he said was he believed our natural psychic abilities, if you'd like to call it that, for lack of a better word, because, you know, it's not really paranormal anything. It's something that's built into us. This is something that Ingo mentioned many times at the conferences when he spoke at IRVA and so forth. That we all possess a large amount of genetic material that science hasn't explained yet exactly what it does. If you've kept up with any of the literature recently about it, we now know that our genome, only a tiny percent of it is responsible for creating and replicating proteins that make up our cells, that make up our bodies, and so forth. Maybe about 2%, according to the latest estimates. And so science really doesn't know what the rest of it really does. We know that a certain percentage of that remaining 98% is considered regulatory DNA, involved in signaling communication between cells and so forth. But there's still a large part of it that's referred to as the so-called junk DNA. And I believe what Ingo was suggesting here is that that so-called junk DNA is actually acting like a radio transmitter, or a transceiver, if you will. That our DNA has a informational component to it that allows us to receive extra-dimensional, interdimensional information, non-local information, and so forth. In effect, that our DNA acts like an antenna. If you do a quick search about this yourself online, you'll see that there have been some articles about this, most recently in Wired magazine a few years ago, suggesting the possibility from experiments that have been done that DNA seems to exhibit certain properties that even if the organism is not living anymore, there's some radio signals there near the genetic material that can't be explained any other way. And if you think about it, the DNA has a helical spiral shape to it that is reminiscent of an antenna structure and so forth. So that's something to think about. And if you're someone who knows about this, feel free to contact me to share some of this information. But that's literally what he said to me. I wasn't able to go into more detail with him about it at the time because I thought we'd be meeting again. He asked me to come back and so forth. And those other meetings never happened because he passed over before we could do that, sadly. But anyway, those were his ideas about why we're capable of doing remote viewing. I just think it's something to think about. And if we find out in upcoming years that there is really an informational component to DNA beyond our bodies, that's really one of its functions beyond what we think it is now, it'll be quite interesting to see that he was one of the people that was onto this very early. So anyway, I really thought I'd share that with you. Look forward to your comments as usual. Thanks a lot for paying attention, being a subscriber here. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care for now, and bye.
And check
I
out
see dead
New Crystal
people.
Minds. And you know what?
That's why we can.
This Christ-like pharmacologist came to me in a dream
Oh.
before we met him.
Yes, you did.
So it was that
He's talking about you.
the glial
Wojtek.
cells made me aware of Wojtek. And you know, no kidding, I'll speak to you extensively about that one day, but I knew you were coming up on our timeline. Again, Wojtek, your generosity of spirit, who you are, and what you're doing is just absolutely inspiring and profound to us. We thank you so much for your valuable time, and we wish you the best in your endeavors, and we will always assist. If there's anything you need for us to proliferate, hit us on the email, hit us on Facebook, and we will push it as hard as we can.
Mhm,
And I will
absolutely.
certainly be there at that meetup at the hub.
Cool. Is that Fastbook with a R? F-A-R-C?
No, he's Facebook.
It's
He means-
Facebook.
He
I
calls
think
it
it's
Facebook.
Yeah, it's a complete farce. But
Well,
anyway, it has
depends.
its
Depends how
times and
you
moments.
use
It really
you know what I mean?
does.
Yeah.
It depends how you use it. Anyway,
So thank you so much for your time.
I'm enlightened again. I know this is my last go round on this planet. I'm not coming back again. I'm done. I've
In
achieved.
terms of reincarnation,
I've achieved enlightenment. I'm
Oh,
done.
right.
Yeah, I've been telling Jamie this for a long time.
and you know what my retort is?
Cool.
That I've got at least 30 more goes round, I'm sure of
Me
it.
too.
you know.
Minimum.
No, I'm done. I've attained it.
Yeah.
I'm good to go.
Well, you better watch over both of us from the other dimensions, you know, even though it's not quantum entanglement.
I'll be waiting for you, and we will
Anyway.
be entangled again.
We just appreciate who you are, and thank you for being on Down South Anomalies. And I think it was really important for us to actually get you for our final episode of the first year we've completed these
Yeah.
podcasts,
Yeah.
because you've always made such an incredible impression on us emotionally and psychologically.
And that's once round the sun, isn't it?
What's that?
A year.
Yes, it's a year.
Yeah.
It's a year.
Yeah.
52 weeks
Yeah,
is
yeah.
a whole year.
What you were saying before, this is the last round. It's like, that's the round, isn't it?
No. I'm talking about this.
No, I know.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I've been saying this to Jamie for as soon as I met him. I said to him, "I'm not coming."
You're going to
back
get
again. This is my
reincarnated
last-"
as a duck, and you're like, shit.
Well, that's okay. That's okay, because ducks like that. That's okay in that context. It's fine. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed with humanity. I really am. I always, wish that things will get better, and I try myself. I try to put out as much positivity as I can, because negativity only brings you negative stuff back. But yeah, I'm kind of over. I just can't do
You
it
can't do
anymore.
another round.
I
I know
can't
I
do
have
another
to. I
round.
know it'll be mandatory. I say I want to be with my wife, and they're going, no,
I
no,
get
no.
sad
You
at-
need a
you
lot
know,
It
more.
might
the-
sound a bit cliche, but it's always darkest before the dawn, right? And I think
Yeah.
you're just as we go on, we'll find more people who it's like, right, well, that's pretty cool.
But see,
there's so much shit, right?
here's the thing, that I know that the majority of humanity is good. I know that. Do you know what I mean? Everyday people just wanting to get on, live their life, be happy, nurture their children, raise them, make good people, send them out there. But unfortunately, it's these societies that we live in that this hierarchical, and the higher you get and the more money you get and the more power you get, you want more, and you will do and say anything to stay there, right? And so politicians, it's like, once they get into power, dictators, anybody that gets into a position of power, once they get there, they're going to do and say whatever they have to hang on to that. And they don't want to go back. And they're the people that are the problem.
Well, I'm not going to gravitate to those people. I'm going to gravitate to this.
No, man. I know, but they run everything. That's the problem. They run everything. And you know what the Greeks say? The fish smells from the head down. No, seriously, it's rotten from the head down. So whatever's at the top, it's going to trickle all the way down. Except the only thing that doesn't trickle all the way down is, how they say, if the banks are doing good and if the business is doing good, some of it will trickle down to the poor people. That never trickles down to the poor.
Yeah. Trickle down economics. That one.
It never does. Anyway, that's my rant for the week.
Just for the day, I'd say.
I came to a similar thing, thought process in my mind, but then I realized I think we can do better, and I think we can build better, and I think if we understand the human aspects to us, right? And we touched a bit on religion, on this 7 deadly sins, right? And I thought it was really interesting, and like those are inherent attributes to humanity which we know about, and we kind of we've got to build around them. We've got to build around them. We know that we're greedy, so what we should do is build transparent systems so that we can't steal, right, that we can't hide information. I think we've got to realize as humans we are imperfect, and we need to build systems which protect the rest of us from that.
A sense of accountability of our actions.
Anyway, look, I'm never going to stop trying and just putting out positivity and helping and being, absolutely. But my last go.
That was so interesting because last week we did a whole section on books, independent press books, and there was a book in 1932 written by a Marine
Smedley Butler,
and it was War is a Racket. And he said, to the profiteers of war, there should be conscription. And when they're on the battlefield for a month, just earning $30 US, they might reconsider about creating a fortune out of weapons of warfare. And I think accountability is a really important thing.
Absolutely.
A good relationship makes you accountable. My wife will slap me down the first minute I come up with an irrational thought. And I mean that in a very affectionate way. But I also am worried physically at times as well.
Really?
Anyway, we can't thank you enough. All the best to Laura. Take good care. Have a lovely day. And thank you for your time. You're in our hearts forever. It was her birthday yesterday, 63.
Tell everybody. Tell everybody that I'm that old.
You know what the truth is?
What?
2 3s are 6. Add a 3, that's 9. I was born on the 9th of the 9th. We were meant to be together. It's a numerology thing.
Absolutely.
Algebraically, you're meant to be together.
Pythagoras was onto it, baby.
He was. Numerically. Anyway, all good. We will be back next week with another show.
You know what? Sure. We have some interesting interviews, and I'm going to name them. They're going to be killer.
You're going to jinx it.
No, I'm not. We've got the astounding Peter Levender, who wrote the trilogy Sinister Forces, and Peter is going to give up his time. He's also part of the 2 Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge.
Yeah, I know.
We'll
find out what happens to Tom DeLonge.
We've got our Australian journalist that brought the whistleblower, David Grush, to Congress. That's Russell Coulthard.
We had lunch with him the other day. That was nice.
And it looks like we've got Don Schmidt, and if we're really lucky, we might have Roy Thinner, the star from the original 1960s. Don't say that.
Well,
I'm just talking about jinxing things.
Well, he's so old. I think he's nearly 90.
So we've got some really powerful interviews coming
Roy
up.
Thinner's from The Invaders.
But you know what the truth is here?
What?
Doesn't get better than this man.
Doesn't
get nicer, doesn't get sweeter,
Okay.
doesn't get more informative.
You're embarrassing him now.
We love you, Wojtek.
Did you see that eyebrow thing? He was embarrassed then.
All right. Okay,
Cool. I'll
that's
see
enough
you guys
of that
soon.
palaver.
Thank you so much.
We'll catch
All
up
right, babe.
very soon. Okay.
We will see you soon.
Let's
We'll
have a
see
look at
everybody.
our promo video
We
before
will.
we
We
leave.
will see everybody next week with year 2 as we go into year 2 of Down South Anomalies.
On Untold Radio, and thank you to Untold Radio and everyone that's on there.
Absolutely. Bye.
Hey, Untold Radio Network fans. Want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.